Chapter 27 begins with a short commentary on the separation between Mr. Wickham and Elizabeth. It's interesting to note here that Wickham and Elizabeth, as yet, there's no animosity between them. There's no antagonism between them. And as it says here in the very beginning of the text, the farewell between herself and Mr. Wickham was perfectly friendly, on his side even more. His present pursuit could not make him forget that Elizabeth had been the first to excite and to deserve his attention, the first to listen and to pity, the first to be admired, and in his manner of bidding her adieu, wishing her every enjoyment, reminding her of what she was to expect in Lady Catherine de Bourgh, and trusting their opinion of her, their opinion of everybody, would always coincide. There was a solicitude, an interest, which she felt must ever attach her to him with the most sincere regard, and she parted from him convicted that whether married or single, he must always be her model of the amiable and pleasing. The character of Wickham is a character which I think exists even today. Jane Austen, in her remarkable wisdom and insight into human nature, noticed an eternal character, a character who plays to every possible aspect of a woman to make a woman think that he's the best thing in the whole wide world. And of course that's exactly what the text seems to indicate here, is that Elizabeth thinks very, very highly of Wickham, even when they part. Later on, she has a conversation with her aunt about this very thing, and her aunt begins to be a little bit skeptical about the character of Wickham, especially in his hasty marriage to Miss King. As it says further in the text, "My dear Elizabeth, what sort of girl is Miss King? I should be so sorry to think our friend mercenary. Pray, my dear aunt, what is the difference in matrimonial affairs between the mercenary and the prudent motive? Where does discretion end and avarice begin? Last Christmas you were afraid of his marrying me because it would be imprudent. And now because he is trying to get a girl with only 10,000 pounds, you want to find out that he is mercenary? If you only tell me what sort of girl Miss King is, I shall know what to think," says Mrs. Gardiner. "She's a very good kind of girl, I believe. I know no harm of her. But he paid her not the smallest attention till her grandfather's death made her mistress of this fortune." "No," responded Elizabeth. "What should he? If it were not allowable for him to gain my affections because I had no money, what occasion could there be for making love to a girl whom he did not care about, who was equally poor? But there seems an indelicacy in directing his attentions toward her so soon after this event." Elizabeth seems very ready to defend Wickham here at this point and says that there's nothing wrong with him trying to seek a fortune. But Mrs. Gardiner notices that this marriage to Miss King represents an indelicacy, a breach of protocol, which an honorable man would not do. And if he has done this, then he is a mercenary man, a man who, again, uses women to his advantage. She says, trying to lighten the mood, because there's tension between her and Elizabeth, that she hopes that this young man, who's lived so long in Derbyshire, is not a mercenary. And Elizabeth responds, knowing that Darcy is also from Derbyshire, "Oh, if that is all, I have a very poor opinion of young men who live in Derbyshire, and their intimate friends who live in Hertfordshire are not much better. I'm sick of them all. Thank heaven, I'm going tomorrow, where I shall find a man who has not one agreeable quality. He has neither manner nor sense to recommend him. Stupid men are the only ones worth knowing, after all." "Take care, Lizzie. That speech savours strongly of disappointment." Again, Elizabeth is falling into bitterness and anger, especially at men, a certain misogyny at men. And she says, jokingly but bitter, "I'm going to go see Mr. Collins, who's a complete idiot, and so I have nothing to worry about there." But here, Mrs. Gardiner is acting almost like a conscience to Elizabeth, saying there must have been something wrong in what was going on here between Wickham and Miss King, because to marry a woman that soon after her father has died is an impropriety. Well, that developing thought then begins to take root in Elizabeth, and she begins to think of Wickham in a slightly different light. But we turn in chapter 28 then to the trip to see Rosings and to see Charlotte and Collins. And Collins again is made out to be a buffoon. He is certainly happy to be married and has all these wonderful grounds and the like, but he is still a groveling kind of toady, buffoon-like fool. And Elizabeth goes to visit Collins and also Charlotte with Charlotte's father and her sister. And it says earlier in the text that Sir William Lucas and Maria are both of them rather foolish themselves. It says here, Maria is a good-humored girl, but as empty-headed as himself, had nothing to say that could be worth hearing, and were listened to with about as much delight as the rattle of the chaise. So as they ride to visit Charlotte and Collins, it becomes apparent that Sir William Lucas and his daughter are both rather shallow and foolish. This is perfectly coincidental with Collins. Collins is also a fool. But all of them end up, therefore, being rather bowled over by the greatness of Lady Catherine de Bourgh. Now, I like to point out that Catherine de Bourgh is depicted to many degrees like a dragon in this chapter here that we're going to read about. In chapter 28 and in chapter 29, she seems dragonish. And the very approach to Rosings, her estate, is like the approach to the dragon's lair. As we get ready in the evening for seeing Lady Catherine, we hear all these intimations of what she's like. Charlotte says, "Lady Catherine is a very respectable, sensible woman indeed, and a most attentive neighbour." "Very true, my dear," says Mr. Collins. "That is exactly what I say. She's the sort of woman one cannot regard with too much deference." Further on, Collins says as they're getting ready, "Do not make yourself uneasy, my dear cousin, about your apparel. Lady Catherine is far from requiring that elegance of dress in us which becomes herself and her daughter. I would advise you merely to put on whatever your clothes is superior to the rest. There's no occasion for anything more. Lady Catherine will not think the worse of you for being simply dressed. She likes to have the distinction of rank preserved." And then further on, "Lady Catherine very much objects to being kept waiting for her dinner. Such formidable accounts of her ladyship and her manner of living quite frightened Maria Lucas, who had been little used to company, and she looked forward to her introduction at Rosings with as much apprehension as her father had done to his presentation at St. James." So going to see Lady Catherine is presented as this big deal. It's really important. She's tremendous and remarkable. And this terrifies Maria, and it terrifies Sir William Lucas, both of whom are shallow, and who see the approach to Rosings as almost like approaching their own doom. They're filled with dread. It says in the text, "When they ascended the steps to the hall, Maria's alarm was every moment increasing, and even Sir William did not look perfectly calm." In spite of having been at St. James, Sir William was so completely awed by the grandeur surrounding him that he had but just courage enough to make a very low bow and take a seat without saying a word, and his daughter, frightened almost out of her senses, sat on the edge of her chair, not knowing which way to look. Although comical, the dread that both Sir William Lucas and his daughter express is the dread that one feels when approaching a dragon-like character. It's so tremendous, so terrifying, so powerful, that you could hardly even stand in its presence. Well, when we actually see Lady Catherine, we see her as described very much like a dragon. It says here, "Lady Catherine was a tall, large woman with strongly marked features, which might once have been handsome. Her air was not conciliating, nor was her manner of receiving them such as to make her visitors forget their inferior rank. She was not rendered formidable by silence, but whatever she said was spoken in so authoritative a tone as marked her self-importance, and brought Mr. Wickham immediately to Elizabeth's mind, and from the observation of the day altogether she believed Lady Catherine to be exactly what he represented." Lady Catherine pronounces on everything. She has an opinion about everything. She is an intelligent, wise, full of pride woman, full of wealth, riches, like a dragon, pride. She thinks highly of herself in every respect. And as the evening goes on, we find her pronouncing on every subject under the sun. It says here, "When the ladies returned to the drawing-room, there was little to be done but to hear Lady Catherine talk, which she did without any intermission till coffee came in, delivering her opinion on every subject in so decisive a manner as proved that she was not used to have her judgment controverted. Elizabeth found that nothing was beneath this great lady's attention, which could furnish her with an occasion of dictating to others." And further on in the text, "Lady Catherine was generally speaking, stating the mistakes of the three others or relating some anecdote of herself. The party then gathered round the fire to hear Lady Catherine determine what weather they were to have on the morrow." So her power is in the fact that she's always talking and giving her opinion and bullying people and pushing them around. In addition to this, her wealth is tremendous and just stuns everybody else, so that everybody that comes in contact with her is just frightened, terrified of her. She's a terrifying woman. And on the one hand, this is the dragon-like character that Elizabeth herself has to confront. And, on the other hand, it is the possibility that Elizabeth herself could become. We see her confronting the dragon in a conversation that she has at dinner that evening, where she actually stands up to Lady Catherine. And this is where Elizabeth shows a great deal of heroism in facing this dragon-like character. She herself is not afraid, as Lord Lucas and his daughter Maria are, but nevertheless it's very daunting to speak with Lady Catherine. And here's an example, for instance. Lady Catherine says, "Do you draw?" "No, not at all." "What, none of you?" "Not one." "That's very strange. But I suppose you had no opportunity. Your mother should have taken you to town every spring for the benefit of masters." "My mother would have had no objection, but my father hates London." "Has your governess left you?" "We never had any governess." "No governess? How is that possible? 5 daughters brought up at home without a governess. I never heard of such a thing. Your mother must have been quite a slave to your education." Notice that Lady Catherine is bullying her and asking her questions the whole time, and Elizabeth has to answer. She's on the spot. That's a dragon-like confrontation that she has with Lady Catherine. And she does very well with it, and ends up, in the end of the conversation, being able to remain composed and calm and speak decently to Lady Catherine. But this is also part of what Elizabeth could become. If she herself becomes disappointed, jaded, full of pride herself, it is possible that she too could become like this. So not only does she confront Lady Catherine verbally and defeat that terror that infects Maria and Lord Lucas, but she also, by the end of the chapter, has seen something in herself, something she doesn't want to become, and consequently confronts the dragon within herself and overcomes it.